In the humid jungles of Tabasco, Mexico, a massive hydroelectric dam project unearthed something no engineer expected. Colossal stone sculptures buried beneath riverbed silt for over 2,000 years. When archaeologist Dr. Marina Cortez receives photographs of the carved faces, she recognizes them immediately. Olmec artifacts of extraordinary significance, but the construction company wants the site flooded within weeks. Racing against the rising water, Marina and her estranged brother Javier, an engineer working on the dam itself, must navigate bureaucratic obstacles, rival treasure seekers, and the unforgiving jungle to document and preserve what history nearly swallowed forever. Chapter 1. The Water's Secret. The Grijalva River had run through Tabasco for millennia, carving its path through dense jungle and limestone bedrock, keeping its secrets buried beneath layers of silt and vegetation. Now, the construction crews were about to change that. Javier Cortez stood on the observation platform, watching the massive excavator claw at the riverbed. Around him, the dam rose in geometric precision, concrete and steel imposing order on wilderness. He'd been the structural engineer on this project for 3 years, and everything had gone according to schedule until yesterday, when the foreman's radio crackled with something unusual. A worker had found stone. Not scattered rocks, but something carved. The photos arrived digitally at 6:47 a.m. Javier had downloaded them without thinking much about it, just another geological anomaly to catalog. But the moment he saw the image on his screen, his chest tightened. The stone wasn't random. It was a face. Massive, carved with deliberate purpose. The features were unmistakable. The broad nose, the feline mouth, the headdress rendered in stone by hands dead for thousands of years. He recognized the style because his sister had spent the last 15 years studying it. Javier hadn't spoken to Marina in 4 years. Their estrangement had calcified into something permanent after their father's death. A conflict over his will, over choices over who understood their heritage better. She'd chosen archaeology. He'd chosen engineering. Their paths diverged so completely that running into each other at the grocery store in Mexico City had become awkward enough that they didn't try anymore. But this photograph demanded otherwise. He made the call at 7:15 a.m. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice cautious when she heard his voice. "There's something you need to see," he said. 3 hours later, Marina stood beside him on the platform, her weathered hands trembling as she held the tablet. She wore a field vest despite the heat, and her hair was pulled back with the same clip she'd used in graduate school. The jungle humidity had flushed her face, but her eyes were focused, locked onto the image with an intensity Javier remembered from their childhood, when she'd examined every artifact in their father's collection like she could uncover its entire history through touch alone. "Olmec," she whispered. "The foreman said they found it at 30 meters depth, embedded in riverbed sediment. There's at least one more visible in the excavation footage. The construction schedule has to stop." Marina lowered the tablet. "Javier, do you understand what this is? Colossal head sculptures don't surface without reason. The Olmec civilization thrived here, La Venta, San Lorenzo, but finds like this, in this condition, undisturbed by looters." She trailed off, her mind already moving faster than words could follow. "The company's committed to the dam completion," Javier said carefully. "The flooding begins in 19 days. The jungle pressed around them, green, suffocating, alive with the sound of insects and distant water. The Grijalva flowed below, brown and patient, carrying the accumulated secrets of centuries toward the sea. Soon it would be stopped, dammed, controlled. The artifacts would remain where they'd rested since the classical Olmec period, but they would remain underwater, untouched, undocumented, lost to the darkness. Marina turned to face her brother directly for the first time since he'd picked her up from the airstrip. "We need permits, legal authorization. I'll contact INA, the National Institute of Anthropology. If I can get them to intervene officially, the government will force a halt on construction pending archaeological assessment. INA processes requests in months, not days. Then we document what we can." She gripped the tablet tighter. "We have 19 days to prove what's down there. To photograph, measure, record everything. If we have enough evidence, enough documentation, even bureaucrats can't ignore it. Javier watched the excavator pause in its work. Workers moved around the exposed riverbed like ants, unaware that they were standing beside something that had outlasted empires. The stone face gazed upward through centuries, waiting for witnesses. "The foreman won't let us near the site unofficially," he said. "Then we go unofficially." Marina smiled. The same reckless smile she'd worn the day she'd convinced him to explore the cenotes outside Mérida, against their father's wishes. "You work here. You have access codes. Tell me you still remember how to break a few rules." Javier thought about the years they'd lost to silence. He thought about their father's collection, still boxed up in a storage unit neither of them had claimed. He thought about the face in the stone waiting beneath the mud. "The night shift changes at midnight," he said finally. "The camera feeds loop every 30 minutes during personnel transitions. There's a maintenance access to the riverbed that's not on the official route." "Then let's go steal some history." The river flowed on below them, patient and deep, carrying the weight of all that had been buried and forgotten. Chapter 2. Descent into Silt Midnight arrived with the sound of frogs and the constant percussion of insects. Marina and Javier moved through the construction site like ghosts, their footsteps careful on gravel that seemed determined to announce their presence. Javier wore the high-visibility vest of a night supervisor. His credential would buy them perhaps 5 minutes of credibility if stopped. Marina had changed into practical field clothes, her camera equipment secured in a waterproof pack. The maintenance ladder descended into darkness. Javier went first, his flashlight cutting a narrow cone through the humid air. The temperature dropped as they descended. The smell changed too, from the green rot of jungle vegetation to something older, earthier, the mineral scent of ancient stone and river silt. The riverbed lay exposed where the excavation had paused for the day. The water level had been artificially lowered, leaving a landscape of mud and stone arranged by forces human eyes had only recently comprehended. The massive sculpture loomed ahead of them, its carved face catching their flashlight beam like something waking from sleep. Marina's breath caught. Up close, the craftsmanship was staggering. The Olmec artisans had worked this stone with stone tools and patience, rendering each feature with anatomical understanding and stylistic purpose. The headdress was complex, suggesting rank or ceremonial function. The mouth was set in that characteristic downturned expression, not sadness but something more deliberate, more ritualistic. 16th century BCE, Marina breathed. Maybe earlier. "This isn't a copy of anything we've cataloged, this is new." She began photographing immediately, establishing scale with a measuring rod, capturing angles and detail. Javier positioned his lantern to provide supplementary lighting while he searched the area around the sculpture for associated artifacts. Pottery shards, tools, anything that might establish context. It was Marina who saw the second sculpture. "There," she pointed. Barely visible beneath a layer of silt, another carved surface caught the light. "It's part of a complex, an Olmec ceremonial site, deliberately buried or protected." "Why bury something like this?" Javier asked. "Because they wanted it preserved, protected from something. Colonizers. Rival groups' natural disaster. The Olmec understood the permanence of stone. They chose stone for what they wanted to last." A sound interrupted her theorizing, voices from above, growing closer. "Security patrol," Javier hissed. "We need to move." They grabbed the equipment and ran for the shadows at the riverbed's far edge, pressing into a crevasse where excavation hadn't yet reached. Flashlight beams swept across the mud above them, accompanied by the casual conversation of bored security guards. The beams passed directly over the colossal head, illuminating it for a moment before moving on. The guards didn't see it. That fact struck Marina forcefully. How easily something so monumental could be overlooked. How close humanity came to destroying or burying what it had created centuries before. The stone face waited in darkness, patient as it had been patient for 2,000 years. When the guards passed, Marina and Javier emerged from the crevasse and headed back toward the ladder. But as they climbed, Javier noticed something. Fresh tire tracks in the construction yard that hadn't been there at dusk, and lights in the administrative office that should have been closed. Someone else was awake at the dam site. Someone else, it seemed, also knew about the sculptures. Chapter 3. The Competitors. The administrative office sat at the edge of the construction perimeter, a prefabricated metal building that housed permit files, equipment logs, and the project supervisor's workspace. Through the window, Marina could see a man she didn't recognize examining something on the supervisor's desk. Blueprints, perhaps, or satellite imagery. "That's not company security," she whispered. Javier's jaw tightened. "That's Roland Vasquez. He's a private antiquities consultant. High-end collectors hire him to source items. A looter. Technically, he operates in the gray zones of Mexican cultural law. Technically." Javier's tone made clear how little he respected the distinction. He must have heard about the discovery through someone in the construction company. There's always someone willing to trade information for money. As they watched, Vasquez stepped back from the desk, his phone to his ear. Even through the window, they could read his body language, satisfaction mixed with urgency. He was talking to someone, and the conversation clearly involved logistics. "He's planning extraction," Marina said. "He'll remove what he can before INA arrives. One sculpture weighs dozens of tons, but smaller artifacts, anything portable, he'll take it. We need to contact the authorities now. Anna won't move fast enough. By the time they send a team from Mexico City, process the paperwork, and arrive in Tabasco, Vasquez will have systematized the site and disappeared with anything removable." Marina felt the weight of the situation pressing down. They had documented the sculptures, but documentation meant nothing if the artifacts themselves vanished into private collections, lost to scholarship and Mexico's cultural heritage forever. "Then we beat him to it," she said. "We finish the documentation tonight. Everything. High-resolution photography, measurements, three-dimensional imaging if we can manage it. We create such comprehensive records that even if he removes objects, we have the data to prove what was here. We have the proof." Javier was already pulling his phone out. "I know someone at the State University. He has ground-penetrating radar equipment from a geological survey project. If I call in a favor, we might get him here by dawn with the equipment. And Vasquez? We make sure he finds nothing worth taking." They returned to the riverbed with renewed urgency. The sculptures seemed different now, not waiting patiently for discovery but under siege. Marina began comprehensive documentation, while Javier coordinated with the university contact. The night stretched around them, humid and urgent, the jungle pressing close like witness and accomplice. By 3:00 a.m., they'd photographed every visible surface, taken measurements, and recorded preliminary geological data. The massive heads gazed into the darkness they'd gazed into for 2,000 years. But now human eyes understood their significance. Now human hands worked to preserve what history might otherwise claim. As Marina packed equipment, she noticed Javier watching the second sculpture, the one barely emerged from silt. "What is it?" she asked. "There's more than two," he said quietly. "Look at the ridge lines in the sediment. There's at least 4 distinct rise points below the surface. This isn't a solitary find, Marina. This is a complete ceremonial center. If you're enjoying this adventure so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from." Chapter 4. Underground Archaeology. Dr. Luis Perez arrived with his equipment at dawn, driving a university van loaded with ground-penetrating radar systems and digital imaging technology. He was a geophysicist in his 60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades understanding what lay beneath the surface of things. Javier had worked with him on geological assessments for the dam project. The trust between them was immediate and practical. "This is extraordinary," Perez said, studying the exposed sculptures. His GPR device hummed as it scanned the riverbed sediment, creating digital maps of everything buried beneath. "These are Olmec, unmistakably. But the scale of the site, the arrangement, this suggests something much larger than an isolated complex." The radar revealed stone structures beneath the silt, rectangular forms suggesting architecture, walls perhaps, platforms. The data emerged on Perez's laptop like archaeology rendered in pixels and mathematics. A hidden city emerging from electromagnetic signatures and digital reconstruction. A civic center at minimum, Marina explained, excitement animating her voice. The large sculptures are likely elite markers, ruler portraits or lineage monuments. The rectangular structures suggest residential or ceremonial architecture. We're looking at Olmec urban planning, preserved by silt deposition. But as they worked, a reality began to crystallize. They had perhaps 12 hours before the morning construction crew arrived. Vasquez was certainly already in motion, and whatever equipment he'd brought would likely be more aggressive than what Marina and Perez had. The race had entered its critical phase. Javier's phone rang at 7:15 a.m. The construction supervisor's voice was tight with controlled anger. Someone broke into my office last night, stole satellite imagery of the excavation site and my copies of the geological surveys. Security's found tire tracks from an unfamiliar vehicle. I want your report in writing about what you saw, Cortez. Javier exchanged a look with Marina. Vasquez was moving faster than expected. I'll have it to you within the hour, Javier said. The moment he ended the call, Marina was already packing equipment. We need to move the documentation off-site. Everything we've recorded goes to multiple secure locations, cloud backup, external drives, printed copies. If Vasquez tries to suppress evidence through the construction company, we maintain independent records. They worked with coordinated efficiency, the product, Javier realized, of years of their father's influence. He'd trained them both to think systematically, to document meticulously, to preserve what mattered. This was their inheritance, not material wealth, but methodological rigor. By 9:00 a.m., the equipment was dispersed. Marina's comprehensive photographs and Perez's radar data existed on servers in 3 different countries. The team had also documented everything on high-capacity external drives hidden in Marina's hotel room and Javier's apartment in the company housing. The knowledge couldn't be erased now. It could be suppressed, but it couldn't disappear. What could still disappear were the sculptures themselves. As they emerged from the riverbed, they found a commotion at the site's entrance. INA officials were arriving, not the small preliminary team Marina had hoped for, but a full convoy with legal authority and media representatives. Someone had contacted them, provided them with the photographic evidence and compelling argument for immediate intervention. Javier looked at his sister with sudden realization. You called them last night, while I was coordinating with Perez. I called them immediately after we first saw the sculptures, Marina admitted. I also contacted every major archaeological institution, several newspaper editors, and posted preliminary images to the American Archaeological Society's Urgent Findings database. I made it impossible to suppress. The construction supervisor appeared at the site entrance, flanked by the INAH archaeological director and a federal official. A decision was being made in real time: dam or archaeology, progress or preservation, the future or the past. The legal framework was actually clear. Mexican cultural heritage law protected sites of national significance, and Olmec remains fell under the strictest protections. The dam company could proceed, but not across a designated archaeological zone. The site would require months of professional excavation before construction could resume. Months was enough. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. Roland Vasquez's presence became known not through official announcement but through confrontation. He appeared at the archaeological perimeter fence the following afternoon, accompanied by a lawyer and a representative from a private development firm that claimed ownership of excavation rights to mineral resources beneath the riverbed. This property is disputed, the lawyer announced, presenting documentation that was meticulously legal and utterly without merit. A shell company claiming extraction rights through a government contract that had never been properly registered. It was the kind of administrative fiction that sometimes worked when moved with sufficient speed and connected to sufficient money. Marina watched the confrontation from the archaeological team's tent, where she and Javier had been granted temporary consultant positions following their discovery. The official INA director, Carmen Ruiz, was a woman in her 50s with the confidence of someone who'd navigated similar threats many times before. The documentation is insufficient, Ruiz said flatly. This site is protected under federal law regardless of surface mineral claims. Any extraction would require explicit authorization from the national government, which I can assure you will not be forthcoming. Vasquez smiled, not with warmth, but with the calculated friendliness of someone who'd anticipated this response. Of course. However, my client is prepared to fund expedited archaeological work. In fact, we'd like to sponsor a private excavation team. The faster the site is documented and secured, the faster the dam project can resume. The state government would certainly appreciate that efficiency. It was clever, Javier realized. Vasquez wasn't attacking Ina directly. He was trying to position his interests as aligned with everyone's timeline. Faster archaeology meant faster dam completion, meant faster jobs and economic benefits. He was offering to solve the problem by, essentially, controlling the solution. Marina rose from where she'd been organizing field notes. Javier put a hand on her arm, but she shook it off gently. The accelerated documentation would destroy stratigraphic context, she said, stepping forward. Her voice was quiet but firm. You can't properly excavate Olmec urban architecture in compressed timeframes. You'd obliterate the data that makes the site valuable. Every object removed before its contextual relationships are properly recorded becomes essentially an artifact without meaning, an isolated object rather than evidence of a civilization. Vasquez turned his attention to her with new interest. An archaeologist, excellent. Then you understand the importance of proper professional documentation. My team could work alongside Ina. Ensure. Your team isn't here for archaeology, Marina interrupted. You're here because there's a market for Mesoamerican artifacts, and you're positioned to exploit that market if the site is stripped quickly enough. That's not archaeology. That's looting with a legal department. The tension shifted. Vasquez's false friendliness evaporated. I'm attempting to be cooperative with federal authorities and expedite a beneficial process. You're attempting to systematically remove cultural heritage from Mexico, Marina said, and you're counting on the fact that most people here want the dam completed more than they want the archaeology preserved. You're betting that bureaucracy and inertia will let you accelerate yourself right past the actual science. Javier stepped forward, joining his sister. The dam can wait. The Olmec site has waited 3,000 years. They can both wait 4 months for proper documentation. Dr. Ruiz watched this exchange with visible interest. By evening, Vasquez and his legal team had withdrawn, his private funding offer having lost its utility. The legal challenges would continue, they always did, but the immediate threat of rapid extraction had been neutralized. That night, Javier and Marina returned to the riverbed one final time, standing before the colossal heads. The water wasn't yet rising. That was months away still. But the light was fading, and the jungle sounds were intensifying, and the sculptures gazed upward with the same patient expression they'd worn since their carving. Father would have been proud, Javier said quietly. Marina didn't respond immediately. Then, he would have expected nothing less. Chapter 6. The Rising Waters. 4 months became the contained space within which history emerged. The archaeological team that took control of the site was led by Dr. Ruiz and included Marina as a provisional specialist, her early discovery justifying her participation in the systematic excavation. Javier remained as a liaison between the archaeological project and the dam company, his structural expertise useful in designing support systems for the exposed artifacts. The work was meticulous and demanding. The colossal heads, eventually 5 were fully exposed, were cleaned, measured, and photographed in exhaustive detail. The rectangular structures beneath them proved to be the foundations of temples and administrative buildings. Pottery fragments revealed trade networks extending hundreds of kilometers. Jade figurines, stone tools, and carved monuments emerged from silt with the narrative of an entire civilization contained within them. Marina published preliminary findings in archaeological journals. The Olmec Ceremonial Center, now designated La Venta del Grijalva, became one of the most significant discoveries in Mesoamerican archaeology in the past 2 decades. Universities requested collaboration. Other museums offered resources for conservation. The Smithsonian requested artifact loans. The stones themselves, the massive sculptures, couldn't be moved. The structures supporting them, the bedrock, the arrangement that had preserved them for 3,000 years, all of this existed as an integrated whole. They would remain in the riverbed, sealed in a specially constructed chamber designed to protect them even as water rose around them. Future engineers would build a waterproof enclosure to preserve them underwater, a choice that honored both the artifacts and the hydroelectric project's necessity. The dam was completed 8 months after the initial discovery. The water rose gradually, filling the massive reservoir behind the dam, swallowing the landscape that had cradled the Olmec site for millennia. By the time the rising water reached the sealed chamber, the entire complex had been documented, photographed, three-dimensionally mapped, and essentially preserved in digital form, even as the physical site was returned to darkness. Marina stood on the dam's crest as the water rose, watching the jungle, now partially submerged, disappear beneath the deepening lake. Javier stood beside her, and for the first time in 5 years, they weren't estranged. They were colleagues, partners, siblings united by shared purpose and shared history. "Do you think they understand?" Marina asked, gesturing toward the sealed chamber far below the rising water. "The people who carved those sculptures buried that city. Do you think they'd recognize what we did? Preserving it, protecting it, choosing history over immediate progress?" "I think they'd recognize it," Javier said. "That's why they carved everything in stone in the first place. They knew that stone outlasts empires, outlasts memory, outlasts the intentions of those who come after. They were communicating across time itself." The water continued rising, patient and inevitable. The dam was complete, the archaeological record preserved, the artifacts secured in their sealed chamber. The hydroelectric power would serve millions. The Olmec knowledge would serve human understanding. Both purposes had been honored without destroying the other. Marina thought of their father, who'd spent his life understanding that the past and present weren't opposing forces but integrated expressions of human meaning-making. He'd taught them both that history mattered because it anchored identity, proved persistence, demonstrated that significance doesn't require permanence, only witness. The archaeological expedition had ended 3 weeks ago. But standing here, watching the water seal the chamber forever, Marina understood that the real significance lay not in what they'd discovered, but in the choice to preserve it. The Olmec had chosen stone to outlast their civilization. Marina and Javier had chosen documentation and protection to outlast their own era. Both acts were statements that some things deserve to persist not because they're economically valuable or immediately useful, but because they contain the accumulated knowledge and creativity of humans who, like all humans, sought meaning and permanence in an impermanent world. The water rose around the dam. The reservoir filled. The landscape transformed into a lake that would generate electricity for generations, while beneath its surface, the sealed chamber preserved the voice of a civilization 3,000 years dead. And above the water, Marina's photographs documented everything that couldn't be shown. The stone faces were copied in digital form, infinite and accessible, preserved in a way that transcended the physical. Their father's collection, finally claimed by both of them, was being integrated into a museum exhibition that would travel internationally. His knowledge, their discovery, the Olmec artisan's vision, all converging in a narrative of persistence and connection. Javier reached over and squeezed his sister's hand. She squeezed back. Some journeys end not with answers but with understanding that the right questions, about what matters, about what deserves preservation, about how we choose between futures, those questions are what actually define us. The water rose. History remained. The adventure had ended. But the legacy would persist. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of discovery and hidden history. See you in the next adventure.